All right. Well, we've got a very full agenda. As I said, we've got a lot of people to be recognized, a lot of relationships, and chief among them is one of our most special relationships, which is celebrating 100 years of partnership in Columbus. And so we want to recognize our Columbus Fort Benning Centennial, and we have with us the Commanding General Eric Wesley and the Garrison Commander Colonel Cox with us. Welcome, gentlemen. Please come forward. And we have Counselor Mike Baker is going to read the proclamation.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yes.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you with us tonight. And it's certainly my honor to read this proclamation into the record. And after I do that, if you would introduce any guests you have and tell us a little bit about the Centennial. So it's my pleasure to read the proclamation. Reads as follows. Whereas on April 4th, 1917, the day after President Woodrow Wilson asked Congress for a declaration of war against Germany, the Columbus Chamber of Commerce began in earnest to have an Army camp established near Columbus with at least a brigade of troops. And whereas an encampment committee of the Columbus Chamber of Commerce voyaged to Washington, D.C. to promote Columbus as a site for one of the new camps, but met with little success. So several members of the Columbus Chamber's encampment committee remained in the nation's capital to speak with War Department officials and members of Congress until February of 1918, when they returned home, saddened by what seemed to be futile efforts. And whereas unbeknownst to them, on October 21st, 1917, General John J. Pershing, commander of the American Expeditionary Force in France, sent a cablegram to the War Department asking for better trained soldiers. So the War Department created a special board headed by Colonel Henry E. Ames, commander of the School of Musketry at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to select a site to train soldiers on infantry skills and tactics. And whereas when Columbus Chamber of Commerce officials learned that a school focused on training infantry skills and tactics would be created, a full-time representative was sent to Washington, D.C. to promote Columbus's cause. And on August 17, 1918, the representative telegraphed home that the General Staff of the U.S. Army had approved the recommendation of the investigating board and that the Infantry School of Arms would be located near Columbus. And whereas Major J. Paul Jones was assigned as construction quartermaster for the project, and although no funds had yet been allocated and nothing had been formally approved by the Secretary of War, Major Jones received word on September 20th, 1918, that the Infantry School of Arms staff and troops from Fort Sill were being transferred and would arrive on October 1st, 1918. And whereas with great haste and with the willing help of the Columbus Chamber of Commerce, Colonel Ames and Major Jones found an 84-acre farm belonging to Mr. Alex Reed on Macon Road, which was selected due to its close proximity to downtown Columbus, city water supply, and streetcar service. And the first detachment of the Infantry School of Arms arrived on October 7, 1918, and on October 19, 1918, the new facility was formally christened Camp Benning. And whereas these visionary citizens, Mr. John Bateman, Mr. Rhodes Brown, Mr. John Ralston Cargill, Mr. Lucius H. Chappell, Mr. Henry B. Crawford, Mr. J. Homer Diamond, Mr. Robert Ernest Dismukes, Mr. W. J. Fielder, Mr. Reynolds Flournoy, Mr. Frank U. Gerard, Mr. Ralph Curtis Jordan, Mr. Albert Kervin, Mr. A.F. Coons, Mr. Frank G. Lumpkin, Mr. Leighton W. McPherson, Mr. H.R. McClatchy, Mr. T.T. Miller, Mr. Marshall Morton, Mr. Roger M. Page, Mr. T.G. Reeves, Mr. Walter A. Richards, and Mr. H.C. Smith displayed the foresight, vision, and leadership to fight to establish Camp Benning near Columbus, Georgia. Now, therefore, Teresa Pike Tomlinson, Mayor of Columbus, Georgia, does hereby proclaim Thursday, October 12, 2017, as the starting event celebrating our year-long recognition of Columbus Fort Benning Centennial Year. Thank you. Congratulations.
Well, General, as you can see, this community swells with pride for the relationship and the partnership we continue to have 100 years later, and we're so glad to have you with us. Would you like to say a few words?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it very much. Mr. Baker, thank you for reading through that. To the council, to the mayor, Mr. Hughley, thank you for this proclamation, because if I could briefly, what it does is it sets in motion a year-long celebration of this centennial relationship that we have with Columbus and Fort Benning. And I'll tell you, it's not so much a celebration of Fort Benning as much as it is a celebration of the wisdom and leadership of this body, that of the chamber, and that of the leaders here in Columbus. Because if you listen through all of that, this is a unique experiment here between Fort Benning and Columbus, because most installations, Army posts around the nation, as I've said before, were originated because of some tactical requirement of a battle from a long time past. Fort Benning is different. It's here because of the wisdom of the people of Columbus, who realized the world was changing in 1917 and they wanted to be a part of it, and lobbied Washington, and we are here now because of you. And the importance of that is that decisions you make in this body can have huge impacts across the world. And across the world you did impact because you've been raising leaders in your community here that went around the world to defend our nation, and any leader of notoriety in any war over the last century was raised right here at Fort Benning and Columbus. So Columbus and this body, by virtue of that decision in 1918, has touched the world. So Mayor, thank you very much for your support. We thank you for the community. We thank you for the leadership of this body, and God bless each and every one of you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Please come around.